So again, crop tree management, science and application. So as Chris mentioned, I'm an extension forester with the University of Illinois. I've been with U of I since approximately 2006. And let's just jump into it, shall we? So today's outline, basically, we're going to talk about intermediate stand management, the definition of what intermediate stand management is, talk obviously about crop tree management definitions, and then kind of go into the nuances, kind of how we go about releasing crop trees. We'll talk about free to grow status. And then we'll kind of culminate with, is crop tree management a good financial investment? Do you generate a good internal rate of return by implementing crop tree release? So with that, I'm gonna go ahead and stop my video and then proceed with the presentation. So what is intermediate stand management? So ISM, or intermediate stand management, basically are activities that are prescribed kind of at the stand level. They are treatments that take place primarily in younger, or middle-aged forests, okay? So these can be young planted plantations, or they can be natural middle-aged forests as well. Now, that's not to say that you cannot prescribe intermediate stand management treatments in mature forests. You absolutely can. So with intermediate stand management, basically, we're frequently incorporating selective cutting, right? So cutting is kind of the major technique we use to implement intermediate stand management techniques. We're removing understory and overstory trees, shrubs, brush, invasive species, woody vines, and we're selectively removing those woody plants to basically enhance the current stand conditions and the future desired outcomes based on the goals and objectives for that individual landowner. So it's very individualistic, okay, because there are 130,000 woodland owners in the state of Illinois. I know that we have people probably online who are not from Illinois, but Illinois has about 120,000 woodland owners. And that means that not everyone is going to have the same goals and objectives for their property. So intermediate stand management practices are tailored for each specific property, for each specific landowner, and for each specific stand that we are managing on a forest parcel. So what is the purpose of intermediate stand management? So intermediate stand management treatments are prescribed by professional foresters to improve species composition and wildlife habitat, okay? To regulate stand density. Stand density is just kind of a fancy forestry term for the number of trees on a given acre. And there's oftentimes an optimum number of trees per acre based on basal area and quadratic mean diameter. Those are terms you don't need to know, but stand density just basically means trees per acre. So we can regulate that, right, via intermediate stand management treatments. We can also increase the growth rate of a stand of timber, and we can also increase the growth rate of individual trees. And by doing such, we can actually hasten the rotation age. We can actually reduce the amount of time it takes to grow a stand of timber or an individual tree. So we can decrease the amount of time it takes to reach economic maturity. So intermediate stand management also enhances timber quality. That's done at the individual level and at the stand level. It can increase mass production. So if you want more acorns, more hickory nuts per acre, or even more beech nuts per acre, we can help increase that via manipulation at the stand and tree level. Improving forest health and forest resilience. That's a real big one. That's another way or another purpose for intermediate stand management. We can also promote and establish desirable advanced regeneration. That's a big one here in the Midwest, where a lot of our stands lack kind of a desirable oak advanced regeneration. So we can do that via intermediate stand management. And then last but not least is a huge one, which is controlling undesirable species, invasive species like Eurasian bush honeysuckle, Oriental bittersweet, so on and so forth. So intermediate stand management is kind of this umbrella concept, right? And under this umbrella concept are these practices that we can implement to achieve certain goals and objectives. And the most common practices that fall under this umbrella of intermediate stand management includes CTM, which is just an acronym for crop tree management. Weeding, cull tree removal, woody vine control is another common practice. Pruning, pre-commercial thinning. Pre-commercial thinning is basically a thinning operation in which none of the material that is cut or removed is sold. So that's referred to as pre-commercial thinning. And then you have commercial thinning operations where the end product or the trees removed from that thinning operation can be sold, whether for saw logs, pulp, or poles, or even firewood. Invasive species management falls under that concept. So does prescribed fire and fertilization. Ultimately, what we're trying to accomplish via intermediate stand management is changing and altering composition, altering structure, the condition of the stand, the growth of the stand, and health and resiliency. So while designing, this is kind of just a side note, if you will, when designing your intermediate stand management prescriptions, just please remember to consider wildlife benefits. Putting brush piles out there, making sure that you have adequate streamside management zones, adequate water resources, escape cover, and especially cavity and den trees. Okay, so the image on the left is kind of just kind of old decadent black oak, but that's a great cavity den tree for wildlife. So via our intermediate stand management treatments, we don't always want to get rid of all of the kind of junk trees, if you will. We want to keep some of those. We want to keep some snags and whatnot for wildlife benefit. So that's really important, because I think sometimes foresters get a bad rap, is that we're, just timber beasts and we don't think about wildlife. But I'll be honest with you, I sell forestry via wildlife every day. And that's the only way I sell it, because most people are interested in the wildlife aspect. Good news for foresters and forestry is that typically the best timber species are also the best wildlife species. So 2 birds with 1 stone. So what is crop tree management? So crop tree management is an intermediate stand management technique that focuses on releasing individual crop trees that have been pre-selected to produce future benefits consistent with the landowner's goals. And later on in this presentation, we'll talk about crop tree criteria. It's like which species to select for your crop tree goals. And that's, again, going to shift based on each individual landowner. Some landowners might want to save a certain amount of American beech, where other landowners who have a lot of American beech are going to want to select against that species, because it is really shade tolerant and can really trouble us with regenerating oak in many stands. So on the left part of the screen, I have a little disclaimer here, not a disclaimer, but just kind of a fact. Did you know? So 93% of the value of many hardwood stands here in the Midwest is in its relatively few crop trees. And that's really important to think about it, because in a mature stand of timber here in the central hardwood region, in a mature stand of timber, you probably have anywhere from 60 to 100 canopy sized trees, mature trees that occupy the dominant and co-dominant status in a particular stand. And 93% of the value is just in a relatively few number of crop trees. So crop tree management is definitely a really good bang for your buck as far as implementation is concerned. So we talk about crop tree management and crop tree release. They're kind of synonymous terms. They're used interchangeably, but crop tree release is ultimately the selective and deliberate removal of adjacent competing canopy trees, basically your crop tree's neighbors, whose crowns basically overtop touch, or infringe upon the growth and development of your selected crop tree's crown, okay? So my take-home message here is crop tree management and crop tree release is focused at the crown level, at the canopy level. Anything below the crown of your crop tree or anything in the understory in the suppressed area really isn't figured into crop tree release or crop tree management. I think it's also important to note that crop tree release may be applied more than once in a given stand of timber, especially when you apply it in a younger stand. So for example, if you have a young CRP hardwood tree plantation, you actually may wind up applying crop tree management or crop tree release 2 to 4 times over the rotation of that hardwood plantation. And as a general rule, most crop trees should be released on a minimum, on a minimum of 3 sides. And we're going to talk more about, what exactly is crop tree release with some better schematics. So the image on the left here basically is this was a cottonwood tree that was girdled and we applied herbicide to it, but it kind of gives you the perspective of the canopy opening, the canopy opening that is created by a deadened tree. Crop tree management, what is it and what isn't it? So crop tree management isn't exactly thinning in kind of the traditional silviculture or traditional forestry sense. It's what I say, it's a tad more nuanced, okay? Because thinning from the silvicultural side is more of a stand improvement treatment with the primary focus on reducing stand density at the stand level, okay? So thinning is typically applied holistically to the stand, where crop tree management occurs at a much finer scale, all right? So crop tree management is applied to a given stand, but the release of the crop trees is at an individual level, at an individual tree level, and its relationship with its nearest crown neighbors, all right? Now, some people say, well, crop tree management actually is a type of thinning, and you could argue that, and I'm willing to agree with you that that crop tree management could be considered a crown thinning or a thinning from above. So, but the take-home point here is that crop tree management occurs at the tree level, okay? There's a tree level focus involved. The image on the left is just an example kind of a walnut crop tree. And we talked previously about woody vine control. Making sure to get those woody vines off your crop trees is really important. Now, I'm not saying eliminate all woody vines. I'm not saying that whatsoever. What I am saying is that you should remove them from your desirable crop trees. Oftentimes people will say, well, isn't crop tree management the same as TSI or timber stand improvement? So this kind of gets in my craw a little bit, but crop tree management is not the same thing as timber stand improvement, even though many foresters and landowners with some similar knowledge may consider the term synonymous. And oftentimes they have been. So for 20, 30 years, they've been used interchangeably. But the fact is that the phrase timber stand improvement is no longer considered a technical forestry term and has been rightfully relegated to the dustbin of obsolete forestry terms. So if you look in the Society of American Foresters Dictionary of Forestry on page 187, it actually won't even define the term timber stand improvement. Instead, it just says obsolete. And why did it become obsolete? Because TSI, the phrase TSI, became kind of a catch-all phrase that lost technical meaning over time, despite many former and current foresters basically using the term. So I'm not going to use the term timber stand improvement. Instead, we talk about basically intermediate stand management, and in this presentation, crop tree release or crop tree management. So why crop tree release? What's the big deal about this concept? All right. So here in Illinois, like most Midwestern hardwood states, there is overall a general abundance of low value tree species and a shortage of higher value tree species on a given acre of land. And some high quality sites have more, higher quality trees per acre and vice versa. But with the implementation of crop tree management or crop tree release, it allows us to focus all of our time and all of our resources on those specific trees that will yield the greatest wildlife and financial returns, okay? So we're focusing all of our efforts on our best trees. And that's how you get the best return on investment, by focusing your efforts on your better trees, your best trees. Release crop trees are thus able to expand their crowns, thereby increasing mass production and diameter growth. So by giving your crop tree the opportunity to expand its crown, it will thereby produce more mast and be able to increase its diameter growth rate, because a bigger crown means greater photosynthetic potential, which allows for more mass production and diameter growth. And the image on the right is just kind of a schematic of you kind of have a free grown tree. This might be a tree that has plenty of crown room to grow, where the suppressed increment on the image on the right, basically that's an understory tree. It's not getting adequate sunlight. It's having to overcompete for nutrients and water, so on and so forth. So basically the free grown tree is a tree that has achieved co-dominant or dominant status up in the canopy. So why crop tree release again? So kind of part two of the slide is that ultimately with crop tree release, the landowner, this is really important, the landowner gets to choose the desired crop trees and outcome, rather than leaving those outcomes to the cruel decisions that Mother Nature sometimes gives us, all right? So we get to manipulate the stand. We get to manipulate the species composition, growth, and development via the release of our crop trees. And that's really important because, sometimes, again, when we leave things to Mother Nature, she can be quite cruel. And we really don't want a canopy full of, honey locust trees and black locusts and American elm and so on and so forth. So another reason for crop tree release is basically what we're doing is we're removing competing adjacent crowns, and that allows our crop trees to maintain canopy status. It also allows greater crown expansion. There's also less competition for resources when we release our crop trees, okay? There's greater mass production, which I've already said. There's an increased growth rate associated with the release of crop trees. So basically, our trees increase in diameter faster, which is always nice, which is also important from a financial aspect. And those individual crop trees that are properly released will achieve financial maturity in a shorter time frame. And that kind of goes back to the hastening of rotation age, where many hardwood stands here in Illinois, they become kind of financially mature around, age 60, 70, or 80. If you do some frequent crop tree release treatments, you can shorten that rotation age down to maybe 50 years or 60 years. So just think of it as you're getting bigger trees, you're getting in a quicker amount of time, and ultimately you're going to generate more money. So bigger, faster, more cash. Here's some sage advice from a great silviculturist, Dr. Arlen Perky. And basically he says that all trees are not created equal, okay? In most stands of timber, there are only a limited number of trees with the potential to produce high value timber products. Okay. So you kind of notice that, this presentation, I kind of have a financial slant, a kind of a timber production slant. But just remember, our best timber quality species are also some of our best wildlife species. So the middle image is a buddy of mine, a former student, Alex Lowrash. Basically, this is a magnum black walnut in central Illinois. I can't tell you the location because if I tell you, then I'll have to kill you. But this tree, this magnum black walnut tree, is 42 inches in diameter. I mean, this is just a massive, awesome tree. This tree probably would easily command over $25,000 on the stump. And then on the far right, that good looking individual standing next to that black walnut tree. So that's also a central Illinois black walnut. And it just goes back to the point of Dr. Arlen Perky, is that, you don't have 60 or 70 of those types of trees per acre. We wish we did, but we don't. Very often, you might only get one of those trees in an entire stand or an entire forest. So it would behoove you as a woodland owner and a forester to concentrate the majority of your efforts on your best quality trees. So how many crop trees do we release? So it depends, okay? That's your standard answer, it depends. So in young hardwood plantations, I typically try to release at least 50 to 100 crop trees per acre. And the advantage of releasing young hardwood plantations is that typically they're planted on kind of a rigid spacing. Here in the Midwest, we do a lot of 10 by 10 spacing, 10 feet between rows, 10 feet within rows. So you wind up with 436 trees per acre. Obviously, not all 436 trees are going to make it within the first 5 or 10 years, but you should try to shoot for 50 to 100 crop trees per acre, or release 50 to 100 identified crop trees per acre in your young hardwood plantations. And I kind of have this similar philosophy too with natural pole timber stands. Pole timber is just a forestry term for trees that are 6 to 12 inches in diameter. Again, I'm going to shoot for that 50 to 100 crop trees per acre. And then moving on to bigger stands, what we refer to as small saw timber stands, where the average diameter of our trees are 12 to 18 inches in diameter. So in those type of stands, I'm shooting for about 30 to 50 crop trees per acre. I'm going to release 30 to 50 crop trees per acre. And then in our medium saw timber stands of timber, where we have trees with an average diameter of breast height of 18 to 22 inches, we're going to knock that down a little bit to 10 to 30 crop trees per acre. And again, these are just rough estimates. So when I say 10 to 30 crop trees per acre for medium saw timber stands, that comes with the caveat is there may be fewer than 10 suitable crop trees per acre, or you might have lucked out and had more than 30 suitable crop trees per acre. So take those numbers with a grain of salt. So here's some of my crop tree tips. And this is really important, I believe. I've been doing this for nearly 25 years, and basically I've assembled kind of these tips for my forest landowners and for the young foresters in the audience. So kind of rule number one, or tree tip number one, is don't scout your timber looking for trees to remove. Okay. That's a terrible financial and time decision. Okay. So basically, don't waste your time looking for trees to remove. Rather, I want you to become kind of more of a crop tree hunter. I want you to train yourself to locate and evaluate your best trees for potential release. That's where you absolutely maximize your return on investment. Okay. So don't deal with the junk. Just go after the trees that are competing with your best trees. All right. So become a crop tree hunter. Additional tips. Remember, you are only removing trees that are in direct crown competition with your designated crop trees. Don't worry about the understory trees. Don't worry about the trees that are in that suppressed crown position. Okay. We can worry about them at a later date, but when it comes to crop tree release and crop tree management, we're only talking about managing the crowns. We're managing the crowns of our crop trees. Don't worry about anything else that is underneath the crown of your crop tree. Let's see here, tree tip number 4, it is completely acceptable to fully release fewer crop trees per acre compared to releasing more crop trees per acre. And we're going to talk about how to conduct a proper release, where a proper release is, making sure that our crop tree has an unencumbered crown on 3 to 4 sides. Okay, so that's really important. You're much better off doing a 3 to 4 sided release on fewer trees than doing a 1 to 2 sided release on more trees. And we're going to get into that later. Here's a little good piece of information, is that when you do a release treatment at the crown level, about 15 feet of open growing space between crowns will provide an adequate release for 7 to 8 years. That basically means that crown encroachment from adjacent trees occurs at about 1 to 1.5 feet per year. So if you don't give your crop tree enough room when releasing it, that canopy gap is going to get fully occupied within just a year or two. So you have to give your crop trees adequate growing space at the crown level. Tip number 6, occasionally you will have 2 adjacent crop trees that may be left next to each other, and that's totally fine. Okay, that's going to happen in hardwood plantations. That's also going to happen in natural stands of timber. You can have 2 adjacent crop trees, but when you have 2 adjacent crop trees, you need to make sure that they have a full release all the way around those 2 crop trees. That's really important. Tree tip number 7, remember, if you have a high quality stand of timber, fully expect that you are going to have to kill or remove some decent quality trees. All right. So on a given acre of land, you only have 43,560 square feet of growing space. And that means you only have 43,560 space of air for those canopies to occupy on a per acre basis. So to get the most bang for your buck, you really have to become a big tree hunter and allocate all that growing space and all those resources to your best trees, okay? Because if you don't do that, you are going to sacrifice growth. And for those of you who have initiated young hardwood tree plantations, many of you are doing it for wildlife benefit, for soil and water conservation goals. But a byproduct is, basically having the ability to sell some of those trees once they become, 50, 60, 70, or 80 years old. And if you don't do some selective thinning at the crown level, it's going to take you an awful long time to get those trees to economic or financial maturity. So step 1 in the crop tree management process is basically identify your best 30 to 50 crop trees per acre. Obviously, that number may be more. You need to evaluate the crop tree's potential to respond to release. Trees that are suppressed, trees with ugly, nasty, small crowns, those are not great release potentials, okay? They're not going to release or respond well to increased sunlight. So you need to negate those from your crop tree selection criteria. And also you need to either flag your crop trees or paint the trees that you want to remove during your crop tree release process. So identify the crop trees, and what I tell people is just be consistent with your method of flagging or marking. So when I go out and mark a crop tree release, I either flag the crop trees for the landowner or I paint the kill trees for the landowner. It's really, really important to not mix and match your keep and kill tree markings. Just be consistent, okay? Don't have 4 different colors of paint or 5 different colors of flagging when you mark your crop tree management practice. It's also important to note that fully expect to remove 2 to 8 trees for every released crop tree. So if you have 30 crop trees per acre, you could potentially wind up killing or removing over 200 trees per acre to properly release your crop trees. That's an important point to consider. So step 2 in applying crop tree management is we need to determine the free to grow status. Free to grow is basically an index of crown competition. Again, with crop tree management, we are specifically focused on crown competition. And basically we have rankings, right? We have an index. So FTG 0 or free to grow 0 indicates a 4-sided release is required for that crop tree. Meaning a free to grow 0, that crop tree has crown competition on all 4 sides of its crown. And then basically we have free to grow 1, free to grow 2, all the way up to 4. So a free to grow status 4 means that no release is necessary because that crop tree is free to grow on all 4 sides of its canopy. And another definition, the free to grow rating is an index of competition which rates the available growing space for a crop tree by determining on how many sides of the crown there is room for growth. So as the free to grow rating increases for individual crop trees, so does the growth rate for the individual tree. Now, you as a landowner, you have the option of only releasing crop trees on 1 side or 2 sides. Okay, that's fine, but you are basically sacrificing a lot of time, resources, and future financial gain by only releasing a crop tree on 1 to 2 sides. You want to release your crop trees on 3 to 4 sides to maximize growth rate and return on investment. Here's kind of a schematic free to grow ratings. Basically, we have a in the upper left here, we have a free to grow rating of 1. And basically, here's our crop tree right in the middle of this hash mark. 1, 2, 3, 4 is basically the cardinal directions or the 4 quadrants of the crown for your crop tree. And in kind of in quadrant 2, quadrant 3, and quadrant 4 of this crop tree, we have infringing trees, or I'm sorry, we have non-crop trees that are directly touching or competing with the crown of our crop tree. So that means that we have to remove or kill the trees in those 3 quadrants. In the upper right is a free to grow rating of 2. And that means that that particular crop tree is, we have to kill the trees in quadrant 2 and in quadrant 4. And it goes to basically free to grow rating of 3. That means on 3 sides of the crown, we do not have direct competition, and we only have to remove 1 tree in quadrant 1 for this particular example. And then in the lower right corner is a free to grow rating of 4. So this identified crop tree, we look at the crown and we evaluate its nearest neighbors. Basically, all the nearest neighbors, there's adequate growing space or room between the crowns of those nearest neighbors and our crop tree. So in essence, we don't have to kill or remove any of the trees adjacent to our crop tree if it has a free to grow rating of 4. On the left is just kind of a reminder with free to grow ratings. The lower the free to grow rating, the more crown competition there is, and the more trees that need to be killed in order to release your crop tree. The higher the free to grow rating, the less crown competition your identified crop tree has. With crown touch and release, the maximum response is definitely realized when you apply a 3 to 4-sided release to your crop trees, okay? You're going to maximize growth and you're going to maximize internal rate of return or return on investment when you release your crop trees on 3 to 4 sides, okay? So you're going through all this investment, all this time, all this labor. The take-home message is, if you're going to implement this practice, do it correctly and release your crop trees on a minimum of 3 to 4 sides. So how to apply crop tree management? So how do we get rid of those competing trees at the crown level? So we selectively girdle them or we fell them. Ultimately, we're trying to create a ring of light around the crop of our designated crop trees. And as a reminder, definitely expect to remove or kill 2 to 8 trees for every crop tree that you release in a given stand of timber. So here's an image in a walnut tree plantation. These trees are probably 20 to 25 years of age. You'll notice, so this is our crop tree here, and you notice that there's really no ring of light around the crown of this particular crop tree. So in essence, this designated crop tree has a free to grow rating of 0. It needs to be released on all 4 sides in order to increase its diameter growth rate. Here is kind of a canopy, just kind of images of the canopy impact created from girdling standing dead trees. And it just kind of gives you, again, just a general idea. So we got a black cherry that we girdled on the left. I think I used picloram plus 2,4-D, trade name Pathway toward on RTU. That's what I use on many black cherry trees. Then the tree on the right, that's a eastern cottonwood. It was growing off-site on the upland area. So that was kind of a no-brainer to release that tree, or kill that tree to release an adjacent crown tree. What are some of my preferred methods? I'm a huge fan of implementing a single chainsaw girdle and then applying kind of an amine-based herbicide with a marker dye. Typically, you'll find blue marker dyes are quite common. You can also have pink or red marker dyes. So ultimately, what we're trying to do is we're trying to cut deep enough into that kill tree to basically sever the tree's vascular cambium. That's where you have kind of a cell division. And on the outside of the vascular cambium is the secondary phloem, and towards the inside is secondary xylem. The take-home point is you want to cut deep enough into the tree to sever those conductive tissues. That way, the herbicide is taken up within those conductive tissues, taken up to the crown, and then taken down to the root system to effectively kill the tree. Some of the herbicides that I use in some of my improvement practices is triclopyr ester products, trade name Garlon 4, Pathfinder 2, triclopyr plus 2,4-D. Those are both ester-based products, trade name Crossroad and Crossbow. Triclopyr choline is a newer product, Vastland. It's expensive, but it won't cause blindness like Garlon 3A, which is the amine version of triclopyr, which is pretty nasty stuff. I don't use Garlon 3A anymore because of that blindness hazard. Picloram plus 2,4-D. This is an amine-based herbicide, trade name Pathway toward on RTU. I don't have a problem using that herbicide, but I do not use Pathway or Tordon RTU in walnut plantations for fear of flashback potential. And then, of course, glyphosate products such as Roundup or Rodeo. A take-home message that I have for many forest landowners out there is get an experienced forester involved with helping you make some of these decisions, because one of the most painful tasks a woodland owner has is to basically kill trees that they personally planted or cared for over the last 2, 3, 4 decades. Okay, just remember that, an acre of land can only support a finite number of mature trees of certain size without sacrificing growth and yield. So unless you're happy or content with what Mother Nature has given you within your forest, you can be decades of help by implementing intermediate stand management practices like crop tree release. So I've seen way too many stunted forest plantations that are way overstocked. Okay, they've received no management, and some of that's due to neglect, and oftentimes there's just this overall resistance to removing trees that the owner has vested interest in and personally planted and cared for. So by getting an experienced forester involved, they can really help you overcome that psychological obstacle of killing some of your trees. Otherwise, you're just going to wind up with a stunted plantation, or just trees that will never fully reach adequate financial or economic maturity. So crop tree selection criteria, some general comments. When we select crop trees, we're only focusing on dominant and co-dominant trees. We're not releasing overtop trees. So trees in the understory, so trees with a suppressed canopy, we don't release those, okay? They're not good release candidates. We also want to only release trees that have healthy symmetrical crowns, avoid high risk trees, only invest your release efforts on trees that will live probably another 20 years. Make sure that your crop trees are adapted to the site that you're on, and shoot for 20 to 50 crop trees per acre. And if you have a timber bias, which often I do, you want to make sure that you select trees that are consistently of higher value species, that have good form and vigor. You want to make sure that they have a quality butt log potential, at least have 9 to 16 feet of quality butt log potential. You don't want to release trees that have a lot of epicormic branching. Sometimes they're referred to as water sprouts. So you don't want to release those trees because they're already under stress. They're not going to release very well. Okay, it doesn't matter how much additional crown space you give a tree with epicormic branching, it's not going to release. Okay, and it's never going to create a quality saw log or veneer log. And you also want to make sure that your timber crop trees have minimal external defects. So here's an image I stole from kind of Missouri Department of Conservation. Trees that you want to avoid as crop trees include undesirable growing stock. So, oftentimes we're not releasing American elm, no matter how pretty it is. Those just don't make good crop trees or good timber crop trees, all right? If it has low grade potential, we want to avoid those trees. I mean, if you can't get an 8-foot butt log that has low grade potential, basically that wouldn't be a tree I would release. Cull trees, V-shaped crotches, malformed trees, so trees that kind of have a sinuosity. If they have, if they're crooked, S-shaped, those aren't ideal crop tree candidates. If you have stem damage or basal damage from past logging or fire damage, those are not good release candidates. And of course, epicormic branching, those water sprouts, those trees are already under significant stress and they are not good candidates for crop tree release. So timber value, from a timber value perspective, our higher timber value species include eastern black walnut, and our prime white oak species, which include true white oak, Quercus alba, chinkapin oak, swamp chestnut oak also falls under prime white oak. Sometimes bur oak and swamp white oak. Prime red oak species include northern red oak, cherry bark oak, and shumard oak. Those are considered prime red oak species. They have a higher timber value compared to pin oak and black oak, which are referred to as other red oaks. And depending on the markets and your growing site, sugar maple and black cherry could be considered a higher timber value species. And then on basically the right here, medium timber value species, those include other white oaks, other red oaks like black oak, southern red oak, pin oak, yeah. Ash species, basswood, hickory, yellow poplar, silver maple, and red maple, those are considered medium timber value species. So if the species you have in mind isn't on this list, then generally it's considered a lower value timber species. And applying crop tree release to lower timber value species, you're just not going to get the bang for your buck. Now, if you do not have a timber value bias, then you can also select crop trees based on aesthetics, such as fall color, sweet gum, red maple, sassafras. Those have brilliant fall foliage displays. So, your crop trees don't always have to be timber species, right? So, you could have crop tree selection criteria that focuses more on aesthetics, such as fall color. You can have a wildlife bias. You want to focus your crop tree release efforts on hard mass species such as oak, hickory, American beech, black walnut. And then, of course, we want to be bat friendly, right? Bat friendly and also pollinator friendly too. And I try to leave as much shagbark hickory in the uplands as possible within reason. Again, everything's within reason. I just don't want to decimate shagbark population because it's, only a medium value timber species. And then if I can get as much shellbark hickory on my bottomlands or riparian zones, I will definitely prefer shellbark hickory. Because of the shaggy bark nature of mature trees, those are definitely bat-friendly trees. So where to focus your efforts? Definitely young hardwood forest plantations, because there's a lot of potential crop trees, okay? So on these young hardwood forest plantations, definitely apply a 4-sided release to all your identified crop trees. Again, we're shooting for about 50 to 100 crop trees in these young stands. And when we talk about natural forests or natural stands of timber from young to middle-aged, we're looking at 3 to 4-sided releases. And then on older stands of timber, you can sometimes get away with a 2-sided release, but only do a 2-sided release on kind of older middle-aged to mature natural stands. In the right part of this slide is kind of a soil moisture gradient. And we go from anywhere from xeric, which is excessively well drained, to dry mesic, wet mesic, and wet. So wet basically means very poorly drained. So on the excessively drained sites and the very poorly drained sites, I really don't focus any crop tree management efforts on those sites. You really don't get a good return on investment. Instead, I look at the soil moisture regimes that are dry mesic to wet mesic, because that's where you're going to get your best form trees and typically your better species complexes. You're going to get more desirable hard mass species in the dry mesic, wet mesic soil moisture gradients. And then site index, some of you might be familiar with that term. It's just a fancy forestry term for basically how tall you can expect your trees to be after 50 years. And I would not focus any crop tree release efforts on site indices less than 60, because I just don't think you're going to get a very good return on investment. Let's see here. So that's just, okay. So when or what stage to apply crop tree management? Be anywhere from year 10 to year 25 in these younger stands. So right before or soon after those canopies or the tree's crowns start to touch, that's when you want to start implementing crop tree management. All right. And, after age 10 to 25, those trees are going to be anywhere from 15 to 30 feet tall. Also remember that most release treatments typically last anywhere from 8 to 15 years, and that can vary depending on stand development and site growing conditions. So this diagram just kind of shows you. So on the left, we have, on the far left, you have stand age. So basically you have, a tree planting or a natural age of timber that's 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years to 25 years. So the best explanation I have for this is by implementing crop tree release at a younger stand age, you have more crop trees to select from, and ultimately you get to dictate the species composition in the canopy of your mature stand of timber. So by doing these manipulations, by doing these release treatments very early on in the stand development phase, you get to pick the vast majority of the winners, rather than Mother Nature, offering you a lot more losers. So that's kind of the take-home message of this slide. Forester J's quick tip. So this kind of goes back to several slides previously about flagging or marking kill trees, or marking and flagging keep trees. So until you become familiar with identifying crop trees and applying a proper release, I would encourage most woodland owners to mark all the kill trees. Mark the trees that you need to kill, okay? Now, granted, this process will require more paint, okay? You're gonna have to paint more trees, because every crop tree, you're gonna have to usually kill 2 to 8 trees to release that one single crop tree. But once you become more comfortable with identifying and releasing crop trees over time, I would then switch methods. I would switch to flagging or marking just your crop trees, because when you flag or mark just your crop trees, basically that consumes less time and you don't need to purchase near as much paint. Again, do not mix and match your keep kill tree markings. This is just another example here, nice schematic from the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources. So with crop tree release, we are not worried about these understory trees, okay? These suppressed trees like sugar maple, elm, in this example. We don't care about those trees, okay? We don't care about them now at this particular point in stand development. Instead, we're only focused on our crop trees, which in this diagram are the kind of the charcoal black crowns. And we want to make sure that they have maximum crown growing space. And the pink kind of magenta paint, those are the trees that ultimately we're going to kill, and that will provide a 3 to 4 sided release for our designated crop trees. Ideal crop tree spacing, space between crop trees, optimum would be 20 by 20 foot spacing. And in an ideal world, that's kind of what we're shooting for. That's what my target would be. But there's times where, you might only have 5 crop trees per acre. Well, then those crop trees are going to be probably, spaced 80 feet by 80 feet. But in young hardwood tree plantations, sometimes our crop tree spacing is going to be a little tighter, and it initially may be only 15 feet by 15 feet. But, we need a general rule of thumb, and the general rule of thumb for crop tree spacing is 20 feet by 20 feet as a general rule. Here's an example of a real image, not a schematic or a picture or artwork. So this was down in Southern Illinois during a Walnut Council landowner field day. And basically we got Steve Felt, a DNR forester, who's flagging remove trees, okay? So in this instance, he is flagging all those trees that are going to be girdled or felled manually, all right? So basically he's just walking up and down the rows and he's looking for major defects, but he's actually identifying the crop trees first. He's not selecting the worst trees. He's identifying the best trees, and then he's flagging trees that are touching the crown or infringing upon the crown of his designated crop trees. Just another example of flagging removal candidates. Oh, I have to throw this in there to pick on Mr. Steve Felt because I'm a chainsaw safety instructor. I say, don't be like Steve, always wear your chainsaw chaps, hard hat, and eye hearing protection. But here's Steve Felt basically removing one of the designated kill trees. Again, in this instance, the flagging represents a designated kill tree. So you can manually fell or drop the trees. But depending on size, I would recommend girdling. So anything with a diameter probably greater than 8 inches diameter at breast height, I would recommend girdling the tree rather than felling it, because unless you are really adept at directional felling, oftentimes you can accidentally, basically drop a kill tree into your designated crop tree, and you can wind up doing more damage. So take home messages, if you have kill trees that are under 6 to 8 inches in diameter, you can think about dropping them. But if it's greater than 8 inches in diameter, I would just girdle them and leave them dead standing for wildlife benefit. So is CTR, is crop tree release a good return on investment? So without a doubt, crop tree management is one of the best investments a woodland owner can undertake on their property. So the attractiveness of the financial investment of crop tree management increases as the number of desirable crop tree candidates per acre increases. That's why you really want to focus your efforts on your best quality sites, because your better quality sites are going to have more potential crop trees, and on your younger sites, your younger stands, because your younger stands of timber are going to have more potential crop trees per acre. So the financial return really increases tenfold when you have more potential crop trees per acre. Okay, so overall, yes, internal rate of return or return on investment is good when you implement crop tree release. But long-term return on investment can be even better if the landowner receives forestry cost share implementation dollars to offset this long-term investment in their crop trees. All right. And so basically, so how do you go about getting some of these these cost share dollars? So the two best kind of forestry cost share incentive programs that we have at this point are the USDA EQIP program, which is Environmental Quality Incentives Program. There's still a good pool of money via that incentives program, and Forestry and Wildlife are kind of allocated a nice chunk, and you can do crop tree release or crop tree management via EQIP dollars. And their EQIP cost share rates vary from, I think, $110 to $138 per acre. So it's a really good cost share incentive rate. And then the other cost share program is the Conservation Stewardship Program, CSP. So that's a cost share program, but the per acre reimbursement rates for crop tree release are relatively low. You're looking at anywhere from probably $10 to $30 per acre reimbursement for implementing crop tree release on a given acre of land utilizing the Conservation Stewardship Program. So the take-home message is that, yes, crop tree management, crop tree release provides a great return on investment, and it provides even a greater return on investment if you can get state cost share dollars or federal cost share dollars. All right. And I didn't mention any state forestry cost share dollars because our state forestry cost share program currently does not have any money, and it hasn't had any money for a while. So some financial analyses, if you're into that, if you're quantitative minded and you like crunching numbers, you can do things like net present value, internal rate of return or return on investment. You can look at things like value growth percentage, and you can apply all of this to crop tree management or crop tree release treatments to see what the actual returns are. And oftentimes with, crop tree release, you can get, return on investment or internal rate of return, 10 to 15% returns. So it winds up being a pretty good investment. And it's even higher if you receive cost share dollars. And again, if you're kind of interested in these, forest valuation tools, there's some great reading out there. One is a book called Basic Concepts in Forest Valuation and Investment Analysis. It's available for free at this URL. And then the Center for Agroforestry at Mizzou has this black walnut financial model. It's kind of an Excel sheet where you can kind of grow your black walnut stand over time and see what the rate of return is on your investment. So you want to learn more? Get involved, get involved in groups like your state tree farm program. Most Midwestern states have a walnut council. And here in Illinois, I encourage you to join the Illinois Forestry Association because, they often have field days and participate in these field days because that way you get to interact with like-minded forest landowners and you also get to interact with professional foresters as well. And then, of course, tune into extension forestry programming here in Illinois and adjacent states with similar timber types and species like Iowa, Indiana, Missouri, Kentucky, Tennessee, because all those states have some great extension foresters and extension forestry resources. Here's some additional resources. Walnut Notes, Purdue Forest Improvement Handbook. That's a great resource. The Hardwood Tree Improvement and Regeneration Center has some great publications. And then one of my favorite crop tree publications was done by the University of Tennessee at Knoxville by multiple authors. That's a great resource. It's color. It's a 5 to 8 pager, and it goes into much more depth about the technical aspects or the technical side of crop tree release. So yeah. So crop tree release, basically it's highly focused, intermediate stand management practice, and it's focusing on growth and value of your best trees. Release treatments typically last 8 to 15 years. So if you implement it in your younger stands, then you get to do it more than once, which is actually a good deal. And return on investment or internal rate of return is truly maximized if landowners receive cost share assistance. Last but not least, if you're a little hazy on a lot of this information because we covered a lot and I talked quite quickly, work with a professional forester. Contact your DNR forester or contact a professional consulting forester to provide you with guidance, okay? You're gonna be miles and miles ahead if you seek professional guidance.